Hello, my name is Michael Dupille. I'm a kiln-formed glass artist in Seattle, Washington, the United States. And I first got my start in art as a small child, and my father was an artist. He did it for a hobby and gave me my first drawing lessons and had a lot of art books around and things. And I grew up Catholic, and so I was always looking at the art in the church, the stained glass windows, the statues and everything. In high school, I had the opportunity. In Catholic school, we didn't have art classes. So in my senior year of high school, near us, a new public school was built, and we had the opportunity to take shop and other types of classes, including art, over there. And I had two instructors that were very instrumental in sort of giving me a push towards having a career in art. I brought some of my work in on the first day and showed the instructors, and they said, "Wow, you're really good. You could possibly have a career in art." And so I thought, oh, well, maybe that's a possibility. They were instrumental in helping me sort of see that possibility. So when I went to college, I looked around the West Coast and found in Washington State, Central Washington University, and they had fabulous reputation as an art school. And so I enrolled there, and my first year I took a number of basic courses and things. I couldn't get into a 100 level drawing class or 200 or 300 because they were all full. So I got into a 400 level, and there I was working with graduate students and people that were, much more accomplished than me, but it really pushed me to work very hard. Also, that first year, they had a glass blowing program, and I was always fascinated with glass, and so I took that. And Gary Galbraith, who was the instructor, who also did wood design, taught us how to blow glass. And there I got introduced to the medium, and I kind of fell in love with it. Parallel to that, I was also doing painting and illustration work. And when I left college, I had the ability to do art, but I needed more of a technical background. So I enrolled in a trade school and got a degree in printing and lithography. And I was using my design skills and my graphic art skills, my illustration skills, and getting work doing that type of thing. I started an art school after that with a few people in downtown Tacoma. We ran a number of classes there, and it was at that time I met Richard Lalonde and Ruth Brockman. They were stained glass artists and on the peninsula near me, and they said, let's do a fair at our house. And so I brought a bunch of my watercolors and paintings, and they showed their stained glass things. They were the ones that introduced me to fused glass. They were starting to experiment at this time. This was probably 1979, 78, something like that. And they said, "Have you heard about fused glass?" And I said, "No." So they were sort of telling me about it, and they said there was a company in Portland called Bullseye Glass that was making this specific type of glass that's what's called compatible, which means it expands and contracts at the same rate, and you can fire it, and if you go through the process, you'll have an art piece at the end. So they introduced me to the owner, Boyce Lundstrom, and Boyce is a fascinating character. He's passed away a few years back, about 10 years ago, but he was one of the founders of Bullseye Glass. Now, Bullseye Glass started out as making glass for the stained glass industry. Boyce was a student of history, and so he started looking back at glass in its earliest forms, Egyptian, Mesopotamian glass, and this is where kiln-formed glass started. Now, glass fusing actually predates glass blowing because they didn't have metal tools to blow glass or to shape it or tool it. So they were using molds, and they were using crushed glass, frit, and other methods to bind the glass together with heat, and then also shaping it over forms, slumping it to create what they need. So Boyce and I hit it off, and I ended up doing a lot of Bullseye's early graphic work, designing t-shirts, and then Boyce separated himself from Bullseye and bought a church camp out in the woods southeast of Portland, and he invited numerous artists who were interested in kiln formed glass. That was his mission, was to see this medium take off and become a craft that anybody could do. As long as they had a kiln, some knowledge, and the materials, they could create pieces of art. You didn't necessarily have to have a furnace and all that sort of a hot glass setup. You just needed, like I said, the kiln, the knowledge, and the materials. So I had the opportunity to work with him and other artists, helping shape how that medium, that art form, moved forward. So he produced Glass Fusing Book 1, and then I had the opportunity to work with him and create glass books 2 and 3. And all the materials that went into those books were done at Camp Colton, which was the glass camp that he had set up. That moved us forward. That put us, we had people that would come from all over the world that would come and take classes. And I became a teacher there and worked with Boyce on a number of things. We were great friends right up until the end of his life. And everybody who ever met him, one person described him as a kiln element on high. He was quite a personality. But that was sort of, my pioneering experience. And it's been amazing to watch the graph of kiln formed glass just go. And, it originally started on the West Coast and moved to the East Coast. And then, of course, as a lot of things go, it migrated to the middle of the country. And now it's an international art form. I've had the opportunity to teach workshops all over the world and met just incredible people, and hopefully help move them along in their desire to know more and create with the kiln formed glass medium. So I do commission work, I do public art, I have a shop online that people can get work for me or buy prints of my work. I still do some teaching, although I haven't taught since the pandemic, and which shut a lot of things down, shut a lot of galleries down. People are still sort of recovering, and some may never return to what they were originally doing previous to that. And, unfortunately, that's the state of our world. So there's so many things online now. And of course, when we started, there were so many things that weren't available. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have a lot of the pre-made tools, pre-cut glass, water jet elements you could drop into things. And of course, the only way to learn something was to actually take a workshop from somebody. And I still believe an in-person workshop, looking over the shoulder of somebody who's done it and knows what they're doing and talking about is the best way to learn. And now there's so much stuff on the internet. The ways I've worked in terms of creating imagery using glass frit to make work, either large murals or more intimate gallery pieces. Those techniques I started teaching, way back, and at Camp Colton was when we were first experimenting with that. And at that time, we had to make our own frit. Now you can go into a glass shop and buy, several sizes of any color. And so a lot of the things we were having to make our own stringer, which is, taking a strip of glass and pulling it on a torch. So a lot of these things that are now immediately available to people that want to pursue this are commonplace. And when we started, it necessarily wasn't the case. Controllers were a very rare thing in the industry. They were mainly, our first controllers were from industrial type things like furnaces and that kind of, those are the people that supplied the technology, and it was very expensive. So again, today there's, tons of companies out there that make various controllers and kilns, and they're all, more specialized. Richard Lalonde, one of the original pioneers of glass fusing, built some of the first glass fusing kilns, and they were very different from pottery kilns. Although we could use pottery kilns, the response and the way glass fusing kilns worked are different from pottery kilns. So, like I said, it's been quite an adventure seeing how all this is taken place over the years and just where it's gone originally to where it is today. I'm still in my studio every day, working, doing things, experimenting, which is what I love to do. A lot of the techniques I've created, those are the things I teach. In the end, that can be your legacy. That can be what you leave behind is what you've taught. And I think I always tell my students, take what I teach you and go from there, build on it, take it to another level. If you want to copy something I've done to learn the technique, that's great. Keep it in your studio, refer to it. Don't start marketing and selling it and putting it out there. It's really important for people to do their own work. And so that I really express that. And so when I teach a class, I don't necessarily have, 10 people in the class creating the same piece. I teach techniques and I want them to apply them to their vision of what can be done with those techniques. So at the end of the week, everybody has work that's different from the person next to them, and we can all learn from what they did. And it helps them grow as a person and as an artist. And that's the most important thing. So I really stress that to people. And if you learn something from somebody, it's important to give them credit. And I think it's really important to keep in mind the people that, sacrificed a lot to put this out on the market. People like Gil Reynolds and Phil Teefey, Nui Fagan, Ruth Brockman, Richard Lalonde, Boyce, any number of people that sort of paved the way for the current state of kiln form glass. You go on the glass forums, and I see when the glass forms first came out, and there's a lot of people doing things, and I'm not a techno person. So for me, joining a forum and being able to comment, it's great. And I'd like to think, my information can help people and help solve problems. But then, there's backlash too of maybe someone who doesn't know who I am or, quite understand the history or the process, expound what they say, and they're incorrect. I don't come after them. I just don't comment anymore. I'm not looking to engage in a negative way, but if I put myself out there with some information, I just don't want to get disrespected for that. That's the main thing. It's amazing to see what's happened with this art form. Richard Lalonde once said to me, he said, we created an art form. And I never looked at it that way. And in a lot of ways, he's right, that out of what we were doing way back then in the 70s and 80s, came this material, the use of this material recreated from when it was first introduced by the Egyptians that is so prevalent today. And it's wonderful to see. So I take great satisfaction in that. So here we are today.
Behind you, you have a large piece. Can you talk about the piece behind you and what kind of technique you used?
The piece you're looking at, there's two pieces. There's a transmitted light piece, which is our steelhead, which are salmon, which are indigenous to the Northwest. And that is a cast glass piece, and that was originally created as a plasticine model. And then I made a mold from that using a glass mold material that I created and is on the market called Castalot. Castalot is, it took me 10 years to figure out how to make the material. In 1989, I got in a car accident and smashed up the left side of my body. And so I wasn't able to lift 100-pound sacks of mold material and silica and plaster and all this stuff. So I started experimenting and looking for a way to create a mold material that would, I could get more than one piece off of. So I wasn't have to constantly, if I wanted to do more than one piece of something, I wasn't making a mold, putting it in the kiln, firing it, having to break it apart and then make another one. I wanted a material that I could replicate pieces from again and again. So that took me 10 years to figure out. It's been on the market since 2000, I believe, and it's carried by most distributors out there in Europe and the United States. So that piece was done off of a Castalot mold, and I still have the mold in my studio. So if I wanted to make more pieces off that, I could. The other piece you see behind me is a glass feather, and it's about 30 inches long or so. I got fascinated with creating feathers around 2004, 2005, somewhere in there. And I kind of started small. It took me a long time to figure out the process. It's done with frit and a cut piece of glass that has a shape. And then the rest of it is done with frit and multiple firings, including the last one, which allows me to gently slump it and create some articulation and shape to it. And then it's got a aluminum hanging system on the back.
What are the prerequisites for an artist to learn photography?
I'm basically an image person. So as I said earlier, I have a background in painting and illustration. It depends on how you want to work with it, because you can work from, you can create photorealistic effects, or you can create, complete abstract works using photography. And it's just a matter of what your vision is. For me, that takes the shape of, representational or surrealistic pieces that I want to create that have some imagery that people can see and understand immediately. And so having that background in painting and illustration is very helpful. I also tell people to experiment with watercolor. Watercolor is the closest thing to working with glass. You have opaque paint and you have transparent paint. And when you put a transparent over another color, you create a third color. Well, those are effects that you can also use when you're working with glass, be it frit or cut pieces. I think that's the closest thing to working with photography. It helps. Someone wants to take the class. The only prerequisite I have is if you can cut glass. That's it, because I can teach people how to do it. It's fairly straightforward once you understand the basic principles. The biggest learning curve with a lot of the techniques is learning what happens to glass out once it's fired, because it changes color. So you have to it takes a long time to get that knowledge, and that only comes from working and doing tests and experimenting, trying things. There's no harm in trying stuff. All you're doing is you're investing some time and some material into creating something. As I do today, and since I started, I try to learn something from every firing, and I do, and it's helpful to keep good records as well. A lot of it is just hands-on. Hands-on is the best teacher. And once you start working with the material and firing it and getting an understanding of okay, I could add less material here and get a different effect, or I need to add more here to get a different effect, or, if I mix these two colors, I get this. There are any number of ways to keep learning from experimenting, and that's the best teacher.
More and more women are doing this type of art. At the same time, some of them told me that it's a bit difficult for them to cut the glass.
I would say, if you know someone that can cut glass very well, have them do it for you. One of the benefits about doing photography versus, say, stained glass or other types of glass is you're basically working with a base sheet of glass and maybe a border. And there are a number of ways to create borders besides cutting pieces. But, you're basically dealing with crushed glass. So there's no cutting that's involved there. And that's the biggest difference between fused glass and, say, stained glass, is that with fused glass, you're not cutting individual pieces of lead. You can cut individual pieces of glass, but again, with photography, you're doing more work with the crushed glass, and you're not necessarily cutting individual pieces. Another product that I've developed is a glass binder called Vitrogel, and you mix it with water, and then you can mix it with powder glass, and you can put it in a squeeze bottle, and you can create lines. You can also do work in the same way a painter would work, where you're basically taking those colors. You can take a base piece of glass and lay out stacks of powders, and then a Vitrogel, a pile of gel in the middle, and kind of pull it off for each color, and then mix individually. And you can apply the paint to the glass in the same way a painter would use a palette knife treatment to create imagery. Same way any of Van Gogh or any of the other artists would utilize those methods to create an image, and then you can fire it. The nice thing about firing it is you can fire it so it's absolutely flat, or you can fire it so, you know, with less heat and time, and it can maintain the texture. So that's a very exciting way to work. I love doing that process. With photography and that palette knife method, and a lot of the things I do, what really makes the work take shape is multiple firings. So rather than firing a piece once and say it's done, you know, it's like, how can I make this better? So a lot of it is just, you know, in the same way a painter approaches a painting on an easel, where he works for a while and then stands back and looks at it and goes, you know, I like it. This area needs to be pushed back, or this area needs to be brought forward, or I need to highlight with certain things. You know, those sorts of approaches and, you know, what I call editing goes on when you're working in these techniques as well. A lot of times for me, nothing really starts happening, or I'm not really reaching a point of satisfaction until at least the third firing. Some of my pieces are fired 8 or 10 times, and I just keep firing it until the aesthetic is there that I'm looking for. And on that point, when we first started fusing, we were using bullseye glass exclusively, which is a little bit stiffer glass than, say, System 96, which is what I work in now, and which is a little bit softer. We were all firing to 1500 degrees or hotter, and because I wanted to pursue this process and finding out I had to fire things, you know, more than once, I started experimenting with temperatures and times and all that sort of thing. And I found when I went to lower temperatures, I didn't have that problem of glass breaking. At 1500, I was having stuff break. When I got to the third firing or so, I would start having issues. So by lowering those temperatures, that helped maintain the chemistry of the glass. I think when you fire at hotter temperatures multiple times, it alters the interior chemistry of some colors, and which can cause a break. So, so I've always taught to fire at a lower temperature, and in that way, and when I was showing some of my artist friends early on some of the work I was doing, I said, yeah, this is fired 6 or 7 times. And they go, how do you get away with that? And I just would tell them I fire at lower temperatures. And that helped. A lot of what we do as glass artists, we wear a lot of hats, but one of them is a problem solver. And we're always, you know, solving problems. A lot of my techniques have come out of not just curiosity, but trying to figure out a way that I can create a technique I would like to do, and experimenting until I got there. So a lot of it is, you know, basically tenacity and time, and a drive to get to that point.
You did several types of art, from representational, more figurative art to very abstract work.
I think everything comes with a challenge. It's like any art form or any material you're working with, you're trying to hit a sweet spot of satisfaction for yourself and the engagement of an audience. I just pursue the idea, and I work very eclectically. You know, I have a wide variety of styles and thus a wide portfolio. So when somebody says, commissions me to do a piece of glass, I'm like, okay, well, that's an ocean. Yeah. Where do you, what kind of work would you like to see? So I think each piece gives me satisfaction, or, you know, a challenge and satisfaction if I'm happy in the end.
About the public artwork, where is it located right now?
I have several pieces. I've worked with the several arts commissions in Washington State. I did a large public art piece with Ruth Brockman. She actually got the project, but had me come in and help her because it was done with frit and cast work. So Ruth was a master glass artist and caster, and Ruth was she was the wife of Richard Lalonde, and God bless her, she's passed on, but she asked me to come help with her and Hal Bond create this piece, and it's in the Oregon State Office Building in downtown Portland, and it's 2 murals that are 6 feet high by 25 feet each, and they're a combination of cast glass and fused glass. So this is the first major mural that was ever done primarily with frit. And because at the time, commercial frit was not available. So we devised a method of making our own frit, and it basically involved taking a garbage disposal and mounting it in a drum, and then cutting the sheet glass into strips and feeding it into the disposal. And when that was all done, we'd sift it and create different sizes with screens, and that was the frit we used for that mural. And at that time, Boyce Lundstrom was nearby, and he'd come in and check on us, and that was the time he urged Bullseye Glass to start creating commercial frit. And they set up a system. Boyce helped them set up a glass crushing system, and then commercial frit was readily available to the fusing audience. So that's where one piece is located, to get back to your question. I have several pieces in Washington State at schools. There's one in Aberdeen, Washington, which is near the coast. There's one in downtown Tacoma that I did with Richard Lalonde, a series of murals, exterior murals in downtown Tacoma. I have 2 on the eastern side of the state, one at Hutton Elementary School, a 35-foot window treatment, and a 12-foot fused glass mural, and then another one up in Chewelah, which is north of Spokane, about an hour, and that's a mural that's done with fused glass and copper. And so I'm very lucky. There's so many people go their whole career without having the opportunity to create public work. And, I'm fortunate in that I've had the opportunity to do several. And so the nice thing about public art is it's there, it's maintained by the state, it's taken care of by the state and the school. You have to jury to get into the pool of artists for the Percent for Art program. And, and there's, a few hundred artists that are part of that. So to get selected to do something is a gift. And the process is very unique, because when, say, a school has a budget for some artwork, they form a committee. So it's usually, 8 or 10 people, and that's some community people, some teachers, usually the principal, the janitor, the architect of the new building, and the facilities person of the district. And so it's a pretty eclectic group of folks. I'm represented by the person from the Arts Commission. So they go in and they start meeting with this committee, and they go through the process of figuring out what kind of work they want to do and who should do it. And sometimes it's multiple artists, sometimes it's one. So what they do is they start with about 125 artists. They go through their portfolios and they look at them. Then they whittle it down. I don't even know I'm being considered for something until we get to the point of the short list. That's usually the last 10 artists. Then I'll get an email saying, hey, congrats, you're part of this short list, and here's a link to the project. So that's the first time I see or hear anything about it. So I can go and look at it and check it out. I only know if I got the project if I get a phone call telling me so. If I didn't get it, I don't hear from them. And they say, congratulations, you've been selected. Do you want to do this? And of course, yes, I want to do it. And then you have an opportunity to meet with the committee. Like I said, my representative for the Arts Commission is the person that runs interference for me. And they're very good about protecting us. So they won't let us overextend ourselves with something. Artists, we want to just do something big and crazy and, over the top or whatever. You have 3 opportunities with the committee to, advance your idea or your concept to the final end. And if they reject all 3, then they go back to the person who was in second place. Fortunately, that hasn't not happened to me, and I don't know anybody that it has. But you go through the process and meet with them. I give them a more extended slideshow to see the variety of ways you could incorporate some of the ways I've worked into what they want to do. And I mainly listen. So it's very important. I listen and I watch faces, and I'm kind of just getting a feel for the kind of things they want to do. Of course, they're allowed to make suggestions, but as the art representative points out, we hired Michael as the artist, and what he says goes, unless we really don't like what he's doing. But his concept and his way of working is what we hired him to do and what we want to see. And so having that kind of support behind you is very helpful. When I go to present a design concept to the committee, I show it to my art representative first, because she's been working with this group of people for maybe a year. So she has a better feel of who's in that room, what they want to see, the kind of things they would approve of or disapprove of. And if she says, yeah, this is perfect, this is exactly the kind of thing they're working towards, then I go to the studio and then I make a couple of glass samples so they can get an idea of the technique and what it's going to look like in its physical form. And then I write up a document that explains it all and the idea behind it and the concept and the process and everything else. And then I hand out a packet to each person on that committee and do a presentation and bring the samples. And, that doing that work up front and putting the time in and going through the process of getting it approved by my representative is instrumental in moving stuff forward. Every time you make a meeting with a committee, you have to pay for getting over there and taking the time to do it. So that money comes out of the art budget. So that's why for me, it's time well invested to do a really good job on the front end. Then I can be more clear in my mind of what I'm going to do and be able to explain to them, what the piece will be. So it's quite a process to do public art. You generally get a year to do it. There's a mountain of paperwork that goes along with it, which has only gotten bigger now since some of the early art pieces that were created. Artists were less disciplined about what they were using in terms of materials and installation techniques. So this, the art in public places in this state has started in, I think, 1973. So a lot of the early pieces they're having to, the school can move or get torn down. So the art needs to be able to be removed safely and reinstalled safely in another environment. So, so these days they have a whole conservation program attached to what we're doing. So I have to run everything by an art conservator and a structural engineer. So again, it's more than just creating the art. You see how many legs are out there in terms of what you need to understand and the people you need to talk to in order to move things forward. So it's quite a process. And usually the last thing, which is really fun, is that, you do a presentation or an engagement day with the school or the community that you created the work for. And that's always wonderful and gratifying. I have distributors that carry Vitrogel and the Castelot materials. So, if you go online, you can find that out, or you can contact me directly if you'd like as well. My website is michaeldupille.com, or you can email me at me@michaeldupille.com. And, I'd be happy to direct you to your nearest distributor, or you can order direct from me if you like.
How is your schedule these days?
I'm pretty busy with commission work right now. Like I said, I haven't done any teaching since the pandemic. I'm getting a lot of requests to teach workshops. I'm going to do a few next year. I'm trying not to. I used to have a pretty blistering schedule of workshops, like one a month or around there. And so I'm trying not to do that. I'm getting a little older. And so being on the road is not as fun as it used to be, but I think the biggest issue is getting there. Once I'm in some place, it's always wonderful. The people are great, and the people that host the workshops, God bless them, and they take great care of me, and of course the students are. It's always exciting and fun to meet new people, and the thing that's the biggest thing I've learned is everybody's got a story, and everybody's story is interesting. And so I really make it a point to go around and spend some time with each student and talk to them and figure out who they are a little bit, and what they're doing here, and why this is important to them, and if they're serious about it, help them any way I can to move their artistic career forward. So I think my wife is a politician. And one of her great lines is lead to lead. So you have people behind you. You've done what you can do as in your job or your life experience to create something and add to the world as you see it, and allow others behind you, the younger people, or the newer generation, to come forward and make their own discoveries. And that's the way. And she learned that quote. She's Native American, so she learned that quote through her tribal leadership experiences, the people she came to know, the elders and people that came before her, and she always acknowledges them. So that's a really great way to think about things. So,
have you done artwork for your wife's community?
We live in the city, so it's not. But through her, I've gotten to know many tribal members. She's done work for tribes all over the country. We go to a lot of tribal events, and I love Native American people. They are some of the funniest. Considering our experiences as white people and what we've done to them over the years. They're some of the funniest and warmest. They've embraced me. I've never had any issue with them. I have created and I donate a lot of artwork to their fundraising experiences or ways they would like to do things. So in that respect, yes. So I've created work specifically for fundraisers for the tribes. It's been one of the great experiences of my life, and I've always, even as a child, I had a fascination with Native American people. And ironically, when I was in grade school, at a Catholic school, they taught a class, Native American history. I loved that class because it exposed me to their cultures and their crafts and some experiences, although it was seen through the eyes of white people and taught through the eyes of white people, it gave me a glimpses to who these people are. And in so many ways they're so much more advanced than we will ever be. It's been that experience has been life-changing for me.
How does the future look for glass art?
I think it's going to keep growing and changing, getting past the pandemic, which was a shock for everyone because, if a museum closes, people don't have access to a lot of things. I think that the online presence is going to change things. I'm curious as to how AI will fit in, and now you're starting to see people doing the machine that recreates things, you know what I'm talking about, all the technology and how I think that'll come more into play where you'll be seeing computer generated glass pieces, and you're already kind of starting to see it where people can take a design program, either two-dimensional or three-dimensional, and create glass pieces from that. There's still the process of working with the material that is the biggest teacher. So you can design something on a computer, is it going to work in the real world when you're putting glass in a form or you're trying to blow it or shape it or kiln forming it into something, is that going to be, that's the biggest determiner. So I think computers, as they've, come to dominate so much of what we do, here we are, you're in Europe, I'm in Seattle, and, perfect example. So it's made the world smaller in terms of our ability to connect and understand each other. And I think that's good. I think it helps us define our perspective. And in terms of glass, I think it helps knowledge to be shared and the experience of seeing art. But there's nothing like seeing it in person. So as long as galleries exist and craft fairs exist, that's where a lot of interaction between the everyday person and the artist happens. Most people, they don't have a museum in their town or small town or wherever, so their accessibility to art, is maybe the craft fair that happens, once a month in a little part of town. And if you can get there and spend some time and you meet someone who's doing glass, then all of a sudden that person gets interested in it. So it's this kind of, if you don't have that, then you don't have access to it. I think as long as there's an interest in it, and gauging from what I've seen over the last, 30 years, I see it continuing to prosper.
Many artists perceive glass art as high maintenance because it's so fragile.
You're right, glass is fragile, but it's also heavy. It's also more durable than you think too. Most fused glass panels that I do, wall pieces or utilitarian things, they're at least a 1/4 inch thick. So unless you drop it on the floor or something, it's going to be fine. And the thing about glass is the colors don't fade. When they go to archaeological sites and they start digging up what was there, the concrete generally disintegrates. Most metals will rust and eventually go away. Glass will not. So a lot of the ancient glass you see in museums around the world, they look like the day they were made. So the permanence of the material alone is worth it. Paintings won't last that way. Drawings won't, watercolors, none of that will last in the same way that glass will. So there's a perpetuity to glass that you can't find in any other medium. It's interesting, I was in a teaching class in Chicago, and one of my students was the head model maker for the Museum of Natural History. And I said, oh, I'd love to take a tour, and see your shop and whatever. And so I went over there and he showed me his shop and we walked around the museum, and then he says, hey, do you want to see some glass from Pompeii? And I'm like, yeah. And so we go in the basement and they've got stuff everywhere. And so they pull out these bins and start unwrapping these vessels and glass pieces. They look like they were made last week, and they were just buried in the ash, and the ash preserved them. So, that kind of thing is remarkable to me. I can hold in my hand something somebody made however many years ago or centuries ago, and that 79 AD, I think, is when that happened. But it's just remarkable to me that, and I love ancient history and looking at archaeological sites and things. So I think the permanence is one of the things that really drew me to the material, and that's something I could convey to someone who's interested in it, and also let them know, aside from working with Frit, there's glass paints too, which you can paint and then fire on. So it's similar to what they do with church windows. Most of the really illustrative imagery on stained glass was actually done with a paint that they fired, and that is a permanent method as well. So there's any number of ways you can cross over into glass, even no matter what you're doing, and that not just flat but dimensionally as well. Like I said, if people want to learn more about me or see more of my work, they're welcome to go to my website and look at things. I have a pretty good variety of things there. I think one of the biggest things about being an artist, maybe this is to your point, is finding a way to market. And because one of the things I do, I work so eclectically, a lot of times it's difficult. People want to see things as look at the piece and go, oh, that's your style, or that's something you created, and they want to see that in perpetuity and not see the artist deviate from that. And so I just can't. I'm blessed with a fertile imagination. What I create is only limited to what I want to invest my time in. I'm constantly coming up with new ideas, which is a gift, but a curse. For me, I like the challenge of trying new things and seeing what can happen if I do one thing versus the other.